When using the Easy Hosting Control Panel, if you're not familiar with it, it may be a little bit difficult to use. As such, in this video, I'm going to show you how to do a few of the common operations that you would most likely run into when using the Easy Hosting Control Panel. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as the user account that I've been given. Now, when I'm logged in for the first time, this is the home page for my account. And essentially the way EHCP works is everything is done at the domain level. So first we need to add a domain to our account. This guide assumes that you've already changed your name servers at your domain registrar to point to your web host server. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a domain to my account. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Domain to my account under Domain Operations on the home page. Now, since I haven't actually used this account before, I need to create my FTP account. I only have to do this one time, and depending on how your host has set up your account, you may not have to do it at all. So I'm going to go ahead and create my FTP account. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can add a domain to my account. I'm going to go ahead and use testuser.tk, which is going to be my domain name that I'm adding to my account. Okay, so the domain's been added to my account. It now shows up in the Select Domain dropdown. And also, if I were to go back to the home page, I can list my domains and select test user. It's the same thing as using this dropdown. So I'm going to go ahead and select my domain. Now that I've selected my domain, I can actually get it set up or create the website or upload files to it. So again, the home screen is mainly used just to add domains to your account, and then the select domain screen is where you'll actually do things for the domain. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and set up a WordPress website on testuser.tk. So now that I've selected it up here, and that's my actively selected domain, I'm going to scroll down to my settings, and I can do these easy install scripts. And this is just an easy way to install some commonly used platforms like WordPress or some forum software. You can always upload anything over FTP and then install it by creating individual MySQL databases and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and install WordPress. I'm going to use an easy install script, and I'm going to click on this install icon right here. And I'm going to put it in the root directory. So I'm going to leave the directory field empty. And the title is going to be WordPress test. And my email address is test@testuser.tk. And I'm sure I want to install it at the root of my domain. And because it's easily installing software, it still needs a database. And so you're going to provide the database information here. So I'm going to use WordPress test as the database name. I'm going to use WordPress test as the database username, and the password is just going to be whatever you want. So once I've filled those things out, I'm going to click on Submit Query. Okay, so now WordPress is being installed using that database information you provided, and it will be available shortly when I try to access testuser.tk. So if you're just setting up a WordPress website for the first time, it's really easy to do in the EHCP control panel by using the easy install script. Now let's say we wanted to do a few more common operations that you might run into when using the Easy Hosting Control Panel. If I wanted to add an SSL certificate to the domain, again, if I'm on the home screen, I need to select my domain that I want to manage, and then all these options come up for the domain itself, and you can click on Add SSL Certificate. And we integrate with Let's Encrypt, so you can get free SSL certificates. So if I wanted to, I could redirect all requests for testuser.tk to HTTPS and use a Let's Encrypt certificate. So all I have to do is check that box and then click on free SSL to do that. And now when I access testuser.tk, it's going to redirect to HTTPS by default and use a free Let's Encrypt certificate. I'm going to go back to the main screen for testuser.tk, And now I'm going to even add a subdomain, which is something you might want to do too. So say I wanted like another WordPress installation, I would just use a subdomain, and all you have to do is put in the name of the subdomain. It's already going to be appended onto the domain here. So I'm going to do testuser.tk, submit query. Okay, so the subdomain's been set up. If you were to log in through FTP to your account, you'll see a list of your domains in the home directory. And if you double click on that testuser.tk folder or your domain folder, you'll see a couple of other folders. You've got HTTP docs, which is where your website files are stored. You've got logs, which is where access logs and error logs are stored. Just for the web server so that you can actually see what kind of traffic you're receiving and if something malicious is going on. And you've got a PHP temp directory, which is where like uploaded files go initially. Under HTTP docs is your domains files, and you'll see here that we have WordPress files because it installed WordPress. Now, the subdomain you just created is going to be in the HTTP docs folder in the subdomains folder. So as you can see, there's test. And here's where the files will go for the subdomain of test.testuser.tk. So if I were going to install another WordPress instance on the subdomain, it's a little bit trickier now because I need to tell the WordPress easy install that I want it to install in that subdomain's test directory, because that is where the files are stored for that subdomain. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this path, not including the HTTP docs or the domain name itself. And I'm going to go ahead and manage the main domain again. And then I'm going to add another easy install script. And so I'm going to do WordPress again. Now this time for directory, I'm going to go ahead and specify that I want it in subdomains test, because that's where the test.testuser.tk subdomain files are stored. Okay, so now I have two WordPress instances installed on this domain. One is installed in the subdomain of test.testuser.tk, and the other is installed in the main directory. So if I were to go to testuser.tk, it would load up that first WordPress instance I've installed. If I go to testuser.tk, here's the first WordPress instance I've installed. Now if I were to go to test.testuser.tk, I would see the second instance. And so I can show you that these differentiate. So I'm going to go ahead and log into this WordPress instance on the test.testuser.tk subdomain. And actually, since it's been installed on a subdomain, I may have to adjust some of the settings here. For example, I need to change the WordPress address URL so that it uses the subdomain, because it thinks it's actually using the subdomain's path, and it actually really isn't. So I'm going to go ahead and update those. And once I click Save Changes, it takes me back to the subdomain like it should. And that's just basically how it's structured in EHCP itself. And so you just have to adjust the settings if you want to make sure it uses that subdomain. I'm going to go ahead and log in again to WordPress. And now I'm going to create a new post so I can show you that these two instances are completely separate. So now if I go back to the subdomain, you can see there's that test post I just added. Now if I go back to the main web page, you'll see that it doesn't have that test post because they're two separate instances of WordPress. And now you can go ahead and adjust your themes for WordPress and do whatever you want with your website. And if you need to access the files, again, you can just connect over FTP. And depending on where you want to go, if you want to go to that subdomain, you go into the subdomains folder and then the test folder. Or for the main domain, you just go into the HTTP docs folder for the test user account, and here are all your WordPress files. So if you need to change anything, you can do so here. And again, with the Easy Hosted Control Panel, you don't have to use WordPress. If you have an existing website, all you have to do is upload the files for it to the HTTP docs folder of the domain that you're setting up the site for. So I'm going to do one more thing on the testuser.tk domain. I'm going to click on this drop down again, which takes me back to the main options for the domain itself. And I'm going to go ahead and create an email account now. So I'm going to create the test@testuser.tk email account. And I'm just going to hit submit query, leave the defaults, but I did set my password. And you don't put in the full email address here, you just put in what you want the identifier to be, because it's going to be test, whatever you enter here, at testuser.tk or whatever domain you've selected. So I'm going to go ahead and submit query, and now I've got an email account. So if I wanted to access the emails, I could set up a POP3 download into my mail client, and I use Thunderbird. But you can also access it in the Easy Hosting Control panel itself by clicking on the webmail button. And so now I can use that account that I created. And when I'm logging in, I got to make sure I provide the full email address and then the password that I used. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Here's my email account. I can now send emails, and I can also receive emails on the domain. There's also this cool interface that if you don't want to use FTP, on the home screen under main options, there's this Extplorer file manager. If you click on that, it's a nice web interface to go ahead and upload your files. So you don't have to use the FTP if you don't have FTP software installed, but I would recommend using FileZilla because it works great, which is this program right here, FileZilla. And in this interface for Extplorer, you can see all of your website files, you can edit them, you can upload them, and it works basically the same way as using FTP. And so that's integrated in EHCP. So that's kind of a high-level overview of what you can do as an end user for the Easy Hosting Control panel. Again, basically, it mainly goes down into the granular level of selecting a domain. And once you've selected a domain, you can do all sorts of things like add a subdomain, add SSL, and you can even set it as a slave DNS domain. You can add FTP accounts. You can add MySQL databases. You can add email addresses. You can easily install software. You can delete the domain. And that's basically how to use EHCP.